Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I'm here in the Stephen Yuille Friendly Atheist Studio in Freethought Hall, which is the headquarters of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mark Dan, Director of Governmental Affairs at FFRF, based in Washington, D.C.
So, Mark, when was the last time you and I saw each other? Do you remember? When was that? A couple of years?
I don't know. Yeah, before COVID, so it's been probably over 2 years now. I think the last time I was in Madison with you guys is when I was recovering from having my wisdom teeth removed.
Oh, wow, you survived that one. Well, you used to come here like once a month, just to check in with the staff and all that. So
Pretty much. It was frequent, and I hope when things settle down with COVID, we can start those again, because I do miss you guys an awful lot. It has been far too long.
So you're the Director of Governmental Affairs. Is that just a fancy word for lobbyist, basically?
Yeah, that's pretty much true. Yes, lobbyist, governmental affairs will take it. So my job is to advance FFRF's federal legislation, build alliances with like-minded organizations here in DC, and generally have a good time. So it's a lot of fun, and we hope you guys can come on back out to DC, because there's a lot of new members for you to meet, different organizations to get better acquainted with, and you guys, the Madison team, is always a lot of fun to show off here.
So there's only one more shopping day until tomorrow's National Prayer Breakfast. That's our show today, right, Mark?
Correct. So today's show, Christian Nationalists over for breakfast. We have with us Jonathan Larson, the managing editor of TYT, or the Young Turks. Jonathan has been consistently shining new light on the National Prayer Breakfast, its ties to Christian nationalists and theocrats, their anti-LGBTQ bigotry and influence peddling. His recent reporting this week has been about President Biden and Vice President Harris's decision to participate in the event, which is in sharp contrast to more and more Democrats moving away from the event. Jonathan can be found on Twitter at JT Larson. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks so much.
Great. Well, we are thrilled you're here with us, and we have an awful lot to talk about.
Yeah.
So tell us about this National Prayer Breakfast. I imagine that some people in government would just get together to pray to God before they eat. But it's become something much bigger than that, hasn't it?
Well, you could argue that it started off as something bigger than that as well, since it was sort of an offshoot of what was essentially an anti-organized labor movement of Christian business people, as journalist Jeff Sharlet chronicled in his book, The Family, which was then made into the investigative documentary series, The Family, on Netflix. So it's always, it was other things than the breakfast before the breakfast even came into being. The breakfast only came into being in 1953, at least the formal big national breakfast. They had smaller ones prior to that. And it's the point I always try to make is it's not that they have some secret policy manifesto that they then try to implement around the world, but because of the nature of the entity, its origins and the way it works, it is typically intertwined with conservative, even far-right policies and politicians, and the people on Capitol Hill don't see that. They literally do not see that. What they see is they have prayer groups on the Hill, which are fairly anodyne, but also very human, from my understanding is, because you have people coming in and sharing very real stories about family strife and things along those lines. So that's their experience, I think, of the family, right?
So yeah. I forgot to tell our viewers that since this is Ask an Atheist, you're welcome to ask questions of any of us. And if you do have a question, you can put it right there in the Facebook comments, or send us an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So Jonathan, briefly, you're with TYT, the Young Turks. Some of our viewers may not know, what is TYT?
First of all, I refuse to believe that. But just in case that's true.
Maybe two of them.
It's a progressive online news outlet, and when I say it's pretty much the biggest progressive online news outlet. There's multiple daily programs that you can watch on YouTube, Facebook. The best known is host and founder Cenk Uygur. So it's they primarily do opinion programming. My corner of TYT is original reporting, which is how obviously I came to be looking into the family.
So I know Mark has something else he wants to say, but before we do that, we need to qualify that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a 501c3 non-profit organization. We might be talking about Democrats or Republicans or other political parties today, but we are a non-partisan group. We're just going to stick with the facts today.
And though we call the show Ask an Atheist, we have a question for you, our audience. If you are hosting for breakfast some of the country's leading Christian nationalists, what would you put on the menu? So put your answer in the Facebook comments, and we might read it on the air, assuming it's family friendly. And so, Dan, what would you serve to some of America's leading Christian nationalists for breakfast?
If I had them over to my house, you mean, for breakfast?
Yeah, over your house or Free Thought Hall or wherever.
Well, instead of ham and eggs, maybe lamb and eggs. Get it? Because he's the shepherd and they worship the Lamb of God.
And Jonathan, what about you? What would you serve for breakfast?
I suppose, well, I'd like it to be something normal, right? Have some waffles or a pancake, right? And that's it. You don't need anything else. Here's some sustenance and you're good.
For me, I would serve any dish cold.
There's a verse in the Bible, if these are true Bible believers, there's a verse in Mark that says, you can eat any poisonous thing and it won't hurt you. So maybe a side dish of mushrooms just to see if they're really serious about their faith,
Always one to think about. So, Jonathan, you reported that President Biden and Vice President Harris are planning to participate in this year's National Prayer Breakfast. Why is their participation contrary to the administration's values?
Well, so they would argue, I think, that it's not. Because as I was saying earlier, what most Democratic politicians see of the family and its operations are the prayer meetings, and then once a year, this very sort of usually anodyne, benign, fairly performative event, which gets broadcast on C-SPAN, right? They talk about the wonders of being united and how prayer and faith brings everyone together. And who could object to that? What I think Democrats haven't fully grappled with, and this is not Jeff Sharlet's fault, because he exposed instances of this happening where people within the family have been involved in some really toxic stuff overseas, and it's very easy because none of the Democrats, and I would suspect this is true of the White House as well as the Democrats who are engaged with the family, they know that they don't think of the family people that they know as Christian nationalists. That's not how they see them, and that's not a big part of what they do on a day-to-day basis. So they don't see themselves as fostering or abetting Christian nationalism. The parts that they don't see, and that we now, because of these documents that I obtained, which essentially are full lists of the family's networks, what we now have a better understanding of is that what Jeff Sharlet found out wasn't aberrational. There are, to varying degrees, you find this all over the world. And we've done reporting on Ukraine and Guatemala, just to name two fairly extreme examples. But the people that the Democrats know in these fairly, innocent settings, with the best of intentions, they would say, they also have private meetings at the breakfast. Keep in mind, the breakfast is a 4-day event. There are, for every minute that you see on TV, there's half an hour that takes place in a closed room behind closed doors at the Hilton over the course of these 4 days. And it's at these private meetings where some of the partisan stuff comes out and some of the conservative leanings help to form networks, which then build up right-wing politicians and right-wing policies overseas. And that's not just a supposition that we make by dint of the fact that these networks are created. We know this to be true. We've heard from an LGBTQ organization based in Europe that said last year, based in part on our reporting, Democrats, you should know that when you participate in these events, you are helping to elevate and amplify the voices of people who then leave these events and pursue defense of the family, laws, and policies. The European Parliamentary Forum on LGBTQ and Reproductive Rights said pretty much the same thing in a report last summer before we even started our reporting. In Guatemala, the networks that the family created ended up having a devastating effect, and not a unifying through prayer effect, but a devastating and divisive effect on that country that the Biden administration is now dealing with. And Democratic participation helps them do this.
If the Democrats walk off if they no longer participate in the event, what happens? Or it's no longer seen as a bipartisan event, then what happens?
Well, not only is it no longer seen as bipartisan, it's no longer seen, it loses the semi-official veneer that it has now. One of the things I've found is when I go through these lists of people who are involved in the breakfasts around the world, I literally just Google these folks to see who they are. And you see in the local media back home in their home countries that when their participation in the prayer breakfast in D.C. is made public, it's almost always was invited by the president, was invited by Congress. The family has knowingly taken certain steps, including slapping members of Congress' name on the invitations every year. They've taken certain steps to give it the imprimatur.
You mean slapping their name without permission?
No, with permission. They ask they ask members of Congress, we'd like to include your name on the host committee this year, which suggests that there's a committee that meets and talks about these things and all of that. And it's very much just a pro forma thing. You know, there's nothing to it other than what you're looking at right now. We've talked to the offices of people whose names have been on these host committees, and they told us, and an insider at the family told us as well, most of these politicians have no idea who's being invited. They don't ask for the guest list. They're not shown the guest list. They have no idea. And when you press them on it, they take no responsibility for who's invited to an event that their name is on. Mm-hmm. So once you take away Democrats, now it's no longer a semi-official, semi-governmental event. Now it's just some people. And that makes it more difficult for officials and other people overseas to justify making that trip and going to this event, right? A lot of them are politicians. Some of them are business people who want to build networks for various reasons. And sure, they'll take Republican members of Congress, but they want to feel like they're accessing the government, not people within the government.
I remember, I remember, Jonathan, I think it was in 2010, the Prime Minister of Spain was invited and went to the National Prayer Breakfast here in the U.S., but he was an atheist. He wasn't there to pray. He was there for some other reason, wasn't he?
Well, I will confess I'm not familiar with that, but with that particular instance. But I will say that people should understand that the family will tell you, and I believe it to be true, that they would like to have people of every stripe come to the event for a number of reasons. One is they are genuinely curious people and genuinely enjoy forming relationships, especially with people with whom they disagree. So they would like that. They would like that. Because it is, this semi-official event. If you're the head of a head of state, you can come to this event. Diplomats are invited automatically, right? That's a thing that just happens. They send those out automatically. That's not a case where the family decides, aha, we're going to invite you. But also, it's sometimes the case, right, that a family associate might want to curry favor with a national leader somewhere else. So what do? They say, hey, I can get you into this prestigious annual event in Washington, D.C. with all these politicians, and possibly you have a chance to get unmediated access to the President of the United States. So there are lots of reasons people might want to go to this that, as you point out, have nothing to do with whether they believe in a God, whichever God it might be.
And that's the hook that Maria Butina used, who was a leading member in the Russian 2016 influence scandal, and how she utilized the prayer breakfast to bring over a fair number of Russian oligarchs and people who are close to Putin to the prayer breakfast in the hopes of gaining greater access with the Trump administration.
Yeah, that's right. Although the only thing I would add to that is I think Butina's notoriety sort of overshadowed the role of Alexander Torshin, who was really her superior. And it's my understanding that Butina was essentially his functionary in this. And what people missed, including the mainstream media, was there was a lot of attention paid by both mainstream media and law enforcement to the NRA connection there. And what we actually were able to do last year was we were sort of able to document that Torshin's connection with the family and evangelical Americans predates the NRA connection and might even be responsible for the NRA connection. But that thing of that Russian and American evangelical connection, that goes back decades. The family's Russia liaison has been active in Russia / the Soviet Union going back literally decades.
Another thing that goes back literally decades is the fact that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has been complaining about this National Prayer Breakfast every year. Let me read to you a quote that co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor said when she sent a letter of complaint. She said, "We are deeply disturbed that President Biden has chosen to address an event that has become a hotspot for Christian nationalists and theocrats, anti-LGBTQ bigotry, and influence peddling. It has been mired in scandal after scandal, including the FBI's arrest of a Russian agent with ties to Vladimir Putin. Every year, more and more members of Congress walk away from this event. Why Biden still embraces it, it is mind-boggling." And Jonathan, we are hearing about people walking away from the event, some people boycotting it. Do you happen to know how many people are publicly saying, no, I won't go?
So we've actually been asking members of Congress exactly that question. And I literally just got an email yesterday, I believe it was, from a spokesperson for Ohio Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, who said that instead of going to the prayer breakfast, he has an alternate event. Tim Kaine, the Democratic senator from Virginia, told us through his spokesperson in December that he has not attended since 2016 and has had no intention of attending this year. They rarely say outright, I'm never going to this thing and it is bad, but I would say at least half a dozen in the last couple of years have given us statements that indicate I have a problem with this event at the moment and I don't intend to go.
Well, we are calling on members of Congress to openly boycott it. We hope more of them will.
Well, it's quite possible that call that you made may be responsible for some of these people saying so. What I don't get, even from the folks who are willing to give us a statement, what I've yet to have happen is for any members of Congress to say, yes, I'm happy to talk to you about the internal dynamics of how this works. I'm happy to tell you, here's who gives us the invitation. I'm happy to tell you, here's the connections we have with them and the other people they have access to. So even the folks who are saying, I don't intend to go to this event, no one thus far has been sort of ready to say, and I'll help you pierce the veil that is around this event and how it operates within the Capitol.
Wow. So what do you think that more members of Congress are seeing, and by walking away from the event, that the president and the vice president do not?
Well, I think it's quite possible that the White House sees the very same things, but the presidency is a different thing than being a member of Congress and answers to every constituency. So my guess would be that, and also, let me finish that thought. My guess would be that the president sees a responsibility to show up at an event that has this sort of all-encompassing aspect to it of representing ostensibly all faiths, right? So I would guess that there's sort of a boring civic responsibility there. But I also tend to think there's a little bit of arrogance. And by that, I mean, I think, and we saw this, we've seen this in the past from other Democrats who have gone, and they sort of lecture a little bit, right? And they say, you know, we've got to be inclusive, people, right? Jesus calls on us to love everybody. So, like, let's do that, please, right? And I think the assumption there is that, well, since we're all there in the spirit of common faith and prayer, I will be heard in that venue, and in that spirit, they will go out and they will practice that love that they are supposed to practice. But it does not happen. That doesn't happen.
So often, as you said, then they'll justify that it's a unity or bridge building event. And after years of scandal, exporting LGBTQ hate, becoming an open market for Christian nationalist ideas. So what are the tangible results of unity that members can show?
So I would say that falls into two categories. One is there actually are some examples of family people helping to bridge diplomatic gaps secretly. There are State Department cables that talk about the U.S. State Department in the past turning to this network to say, you know, see what you can find out, see if you can connect these people, that kind of thing. I suspect, though, that the more tangible, positive result that at least the Democrats see is that it creates personal bridges, right? It's like Democrats have a sense, I think, and this is admittedly speculative based on, you know, looking into these folks and their relationships. I think there's a sense that when they build personal relationships with hard-right Republicans through prayer, through the family, that to them is a very powerful thing, right? Oh my gosh, they don't see me that way. I can build on that, and that's a seed for having hope. The problem is that a lot of people in the world, not just some Republicans, a lot of people have real trouble applying in the abstract the lessons they learn when they meet people one-on-one, right? We've seen this before with, like, I think Republican Dan Quayle, I think, was a totally anti-choice until his daughter needed an abortion, right? Then there's the Cheney family, right? So they have a tough time with it in the abstract. When they see someone one-on-one, it's a lot more difficult for them to deny that person their humanity. The problem is that's not how the world works. It's not one-on-one. You have to be able to apply empathy abstractly to the entire world.
And sort of what is the product that is being made with the Fellowship Foundation that supports the prayer organization, aka the family, as well. And I think that's something to keep in mind. So if you have questions for Jonathan Larson, editor and executive producer of TYT, ask them in the Facebook comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Further, if you want more information on this subject, you can see all of Jonathan's reporting on this. Go to tyt.com/inside the family, and you can see all of his fantastic reporting, whether it is how Mike Lindell utilized the prayer breakfast and then got into Trump's inner circle. You can read more about Maria Butina and the Russia connection. You can read more about how the family has exported LGBTQ hate, how they helped orchestrate leadership in Guatemala, former Soviet Union, you name it. So if you want more, this is probably our interview with Jonathan's more of an appetizer, but if you want the main course, go check out a lot of his articles. They're fantastic and might even keep you up at night.
Hey, I like that analogy, Mark. You're talking about breakfast, appetizer, main course. We do have some.
I'd like to have you do an ad for us, Mark.
Sounds good. Bring it on.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we do have some questions, but before we get to them, I have a question for you, Mark. Jonathan was asking, how can we get some of the backside details about the invitations and all that? You're a lobbyist. Couldn't you ask some of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus members, or is there somebody you could ask to try to figure out some of that?
Yeah, I think that is a good route to take. And I think one of the things that we can highlight is the more information and the more traction this starts to get, of realizing that this is not exactly, what Senator Brown is doing in his community of having a true interfaith prayer service is a fantastic idea, something that brings in all sorts of folks and doesn't have this connection to essentially fundamentalist religion. So the more people can do this, I know TYT has also a petition online of where people can take action. Same thing with with FFRF as well. So I think a lot of it is an inside the Capitol strategy, but also keeping the grassroots pressure on. And again, as Jonathan said, last year you did see 8 Democrats on the House side, and that number dropped significantly this year. So that you are starting to see this erosion. So whatever the pressure is, keep it up.
Well, even if it did become more inclusive and less fundamentalist, we would still have a problem with the government mixing with a prayer breakfast anyway. Even if it were liberal, we would still think that should be done privately. Those who want to pray are free to pray, but our government should not be involved in it.
Yeah.
So should we take questions or something else?
Sure. I think there's some good stuff here.
I can read them, or can you?
There's a lot of good stuff here. So Ivan Ivanovich, interesting with Marie Butina, wants to know, what are they praying for anyway at the prayer breakfast? General things like world peace?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, the public remarks, right? The answer is basically it depends. The public remarks are fairly anodyne, like you just suggested. It's for unity. It's for peace. It's for compassion towards each other, towards the poor. The family's philosophy is that if they minister to the leaders of the world, not just the elected leaders, but any leaders of the world, then helping those people will have a natural knock-on effect that benefits the entire world. Trickle down, I'm not sure exactly what it is trickling down, but that's kind of the approach there. And so they pray for the leaders, for sure, but they don't get more specific than, sort of faith and unity and peace and things along those lines. In the breakout sessions, these side meetings of a dozen or so people behind closed doors, that's where things get a little bit more specific and the rubber meets the road.
And that's where Mike Lindell got well acquainted with members of the Trump administration?
So it didn't happen quite that directly, but basically, yeah, members of the family, insiders at the family, got connected to Mike Lindell through actor Stephen Baldwin, who they were already connected to. And they invited him to, I believe, the 2016 National Prayer Breakfast. And in a breakout session at the breakfast, Lindell spoke with about a dozen other family insiders, family friends, so on and so forth. And that became a key step that began his radicalization. Prior to that, and he says, this is his own words, he says he didn't know the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. His faith was a very sort of bland, Main Street, non-specific, yeah, I guess I'm a Christian kind of thing. Once he began to get connected to the family at the prayer breakfast, because the people who invited him, they weren't super, super insiders. But once they bring him to the breakfast, now the super insiders, including a board member and their spokesperson, then they got connected. And what we found was over the next 24 months or so, they were bringing him to more of these events. They brought him to the prayer breakfast again the following year. They brought him to a retreat, one of these sort of like break you down, make you surrender to Jesus kind of things. And they engaged him specifically on his politics. And by the end of those 2 years, he was the Mike Lindell you now know and don't buy pillows from.
Well, he has money too. I mean, that's a draw there, isn't it?
That is 100% a draw. And the reason I say that is because the way the family works is that they have a budget every year, according to their taxes, somewhere between, say, $11 and $13 million. Most of that is these sort of ministers, these self-appointed ministers, sort of operating out in the world throughout the states with their own support system, right? So they have rich buddies, and they say to their rich buddies, "Hey, I can keep doing this work if you can support me." And then the money goes to the family, but it's really the family in some senses is acting as sort of an aggressive clearinghouse, right? They certainly have guidelines. They want to make sure that the work is roughly within the family's mandate, but they're essentially acting as sort of an administrative payroll kind of function there. So in order to continue leading this lifestyle, which, by the way, does not seem to be terribly grueling, they need to make sure that they have rich friends, which, of course, is part of the family's mission. Minister to leaders. Who gets to lead? People with money.
Well, the family needs a financial cushion. There's a joke there. There's a joke there.
There's a My Pillow joke there.
You got
sure. But yeah, the family definitely needs a financial cushion. But and I couldn't tell you what their finances are, but they definitely have some very rich backers. There's a GOP megadonor named Ronnie Cameron, who we were able to see, and others reported first, was through his nonprofit called the Jesus Fund, was very generously funding the family. Now, since that was reported, he has now shifted most of his donations to the National Christian Charitable Foundation, which is a $1 billion donor-directed fund, and they, in turn, have ramped up their funding of the family. So it's sort of God washing the money a little bit, so we can't say definitively where it's going. But yeah, they need a certain basis of funding, and they also get support for the breakfast from Franklin Graham. But they're also very cellular. All those people I was telling you about, if one of them goes away, that's fine, because they were self-sustaining and they weren't a draw. So there's a lot of flexibility built into that system.
And a lot of the foundation of the Prayer Breakfast and the Fellowship Foundation is sprung out of being against the New Deal, being against unions, which is really weird because I think a lot of friends in Christianity would say that it is blessed are the meek and loving the poor and being charitable. Why is this so much on its head of embracing the strong man, and why do they embrace strong men?
Well, it's not a monolithic organization, so I don't want to offer an explanation that sort of I don't want to suggest that this applies to how they all think or get too much into their subconscious. But for an ostensibly religious organization, they're remarkably unschooled in theology. It's not unusual to come across someone who has gone to seminary or used to be a man or woman of the cloth. That certainly happens, but that's the exception, not the rule. For the most part, this is primarily just a bunch of dudes who, for the most part, have real emotional intelligence and do seem to be invested in others, but much more so, as I said earlier, when they're face-to-face with people rather than being able to abstract that. And so when they think about what does doing good mean, how can I serve Jesus, it tends to be things that feel good for them to do in the moment, right? And so if you believe that you should minister to leaders, right, then you get connected to rich people. And what are you doing? You're ministering to them. But you didn't go to seminary, so you're not sitting there arguing, saying, hey, this is not what Aquinas would want you to do, right? He specifically says, don't do this, don't do that. They're not about the thou shalt nots. They're about, are you doing good, right? That's it. And they don't believe in the kind of transparency and accountability that's adversarial, right? That's real accountability. They believe in these sort of accountability teams, which means you get a bunch of friends around you and they go, dude, are you really trying hard? Are you taking care of your marriage? Are you doing the right thing? And that's it, right? Not, well, we notice that you invested in fossil fuels, right? So it feels good, right? You hang out with people who you are like, and you tell yourself and you tell them that you are doing the Lord's work, even though you might never even have read even New Testament, let alone the Old Testament. It's just basically, Doug Coe's, former leader Doug Coe's saying was Jesus plus nothing, as Jeff Charlotte so memorably talked about. And they're very literal about that. It's just Jesus, and that can mean whatever you think it means.
Well, it obviously has a huge political component. It's not just helping each other. They realize they have some connection to the halls of power, and they want to capitalize on that. And I think one of the questions here is about why so many people of color and minorities in that are attracted to this event, because a lot of them are anti-LGBTQ and that's the issue that brings them together. Is that a good issue to bring people together with?
I'm not sure I can sort of sign off on that premise. I don't think I have reason to believe that there's a lot of people of color inside. There are some, but I think they are underrepresented. If I had to guess, I would say they're underrepresented compared to the general population. So I'm not sure I buy into the central premise. Sorry.
Well, that says a lot then, doesn't it?
Well, that says something different, but it certainly says something potentially important. And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, which is that they just go off of their feelings. And so the people they connect and pursue with, they're not being responsible or strategic about how they do it. So they might wish they had a lot of LGBTQ folks or people of color there, but they don't sit down and make a list and say, okay, I've got to work to pursue this. It's just, oh, too bad Jesus didn't connect me with those people. Well, why? Because you don't go to them. You go where is comfortable for you. You go where you feel Jesus is leading you, which just happens to be that guy you like to golf with. And then you meet the friends of the guy you like to golf with. Turns out they're not too different.
It's always interesting when folks sometimes say that I'm doing God's will, but yet it seems a lot of times God's will happens to coincide with someone's own personal ambition. Really, it seems to go well together with personal ambition and God's will.
You rarely see anyone saying, God damn it, God's will sucks. I hate this. I guess I got to do it because it's God's will. But man, I wish that were not the case. The things they know are God's will often tend to be things, as you say, that line up pretty neatly with what they're okay doing.
And a lot of folks online are saying that, well, it looks like this is a government endorsement of religion, but it's not. And I think what makes this a very deceiving event, it's not an official government event, but it's has the trappings of government. So how does that work, and why is that a dangerous facade?
So it's Schrodinger's breakfast. When it benefits them for it to be a government event, then it's a government event. When you want to hold it accountable in the way that you are entitled by law and by democratic principles to hold institutions accountable, then it's a private event. Oh, you're a government event? Please show me the guest list. We're a private event. Oh, you're a private event? Well, then why are the politicians going? Well, we're a government event. They don't literally say either of those. They often don't say, they usually don't say anything at all. But that's the advantage, is that you can be whichever benefits you most, depending on the situation.
Yeah. And Errol Neal writes, is the fact that the family and politicians appear to be more secretive now about who's attending the National Prayer Breakfast, is it an implicit admission that they know it's unconstitutional and the church-state entanglements like this are becoming more unpopular with an increasing secular society, or possibly both?
So I was at first going to disagree with the premise of that question, because I think historically that may not be the case. But then I realized, oh, maybe that person, and I missed the name, so I apologize, gentle person who submitted the question. But it occurred to me, maybe they read the most recent story I did about Biden, which was about the fact that the Democrats participating this year in the host committees, they've been extremely quiet about this, right? I asked Gillibrand's office back in September to confirm what I was hearing, which was that she would co-chair. They never got back to me, and still to this day have never publicly said, I'm proud to announce that I'm the co-chair of this year's National Prayer Breakfast. And I don't necessarily think that it's because of the church-state entanglements. I tend to think it's because the calculus, because I honestly think as a nation, I think we were more attuned to the problems with those entanglements in our past than we are now. The ACLU does not seem to be terribly robust on this issue in ways that they used to be. But I do think there are related political concerns and other constituencies. There's reproductive rights, there's LGBTQ issues, there's religious discrimination. There's a bunch of other issues and a bunch of other constituencies who might actually have more clout and might inspire more concern among politicians who maybe for those reasons don't want to be seen as doing something counter to the image that they typically put out, which is in favor of those people and those issues. That's my guess.
Sounds good. And also, we have another question. From your research, does it seem like politicians are attending the National Prayer Breakfast mostly as a way to raise money, as a way to get religious backing to appeal to Christian voters, or other factors?
I would say I think it's other factors. I don't think they do a lot of fundraising at the event. I don't think it's conducive to that. And most of them, you don't actually know whether they have gone or not, because as I said, it's not public. So I do think other factors play into it. I do suspect, and I have reason to believe that this is true, that there's sort of a lingering fear of the Fox factor, right? No one wants to use a public rejection. No one wants to have a public rejection of the prayer breakfast thrown at them for being insufficiently religious. But I tend to think our politics have become so extreme now that that's no longer effective, right? If anyone who would have voted for FDR is now a socialist monster, not going to a breakfast is no longer a terribly effective critique. So I tend to think it's mostly, I would guess most of them go because it sounds like a good thing, and that's what Congress did the year before. And most of these folks, it's a personal thing. When they first came to Congress, a human being, probably another member of Congress, reached out to them. And that's a meaningful thing. Right. You're new in this incredible institution, and someone reaches out to you and says, hey, welcome. We have a weekly group that meets and connects on a human basis. No lobbyists, no offense, Mark. No,
probably a good thing.
No media, no offense, me. And we'd like you to come, and we'd like to share our stories with you, and we'd like to hear your stories and be there if we can. That's got to be hugely powerful, and there are good things to that, right? They say religion is the opiate of the masses because people really like opiates, right? There are good things to it, and so I think that has. I think that's probably the thing that motivates involvement in the National Prayer Breakfast, because again, the other aspects of the national event are fairly invisible even to the members of Congress who go to it. That's, if I had to guess, which I do, that's my guess.
So we're almost out of time, Jonathan. Sorry, Mark. But two quick questions. Is it true that this is totally private? There's no governmental money spent on it? And is there any connection between the National Prayer Breakfast and state and local prayer breakfasts that are happening, or what could we do about that?
The answer to the latter is absolutely there is a connection. And sometimes it's findable. Sometimes the various people connected with the family talk about their work, and you'll see in the local media so-and-so who runs the Walla Walla, Washington weekly prayer breakfast is also a facilitator for the National Prayer Breakfast. So you do see those things pop up all the time. And as for what people can do about it, it depends on the situation, right? It's politics, right? So what you can do about is practice politics. You can say to the local politicians or to the local constituencies, this is why this is a problem, and this is what we want you to do about it. You can basically engage the political process. That's the best guidance I have there, which is what you do. In terms of federal money going towards it, I have not seen that. I'm not aware of that being the case. Now, obviously, it does incur some federal expenses because the president goes, and so you have related expenses. But I'm not aware of, and I've never heard of the government putting money into this. And I think, given the reporting I've been doing and the documents I've looked at, I think I would be aware of that. Now, I will add that tomorrow's, for the first time, is being held at the U.S. Capitol Visitors Center auditorium, which is a federal facility, but it's one that any member of Congress can request the use of for their events. So you can make a case, in terms of the separation clause there, but that you'd have a much bigger battle because it's used for lots of faith-based events.
Well, could we host Ask an Atheist from that venue someday?
As far as I know, if you get one of the Free Thought Caucus members to request it for you, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to.
We could have some anti-prayer. Well, thank you, Jonathan Larson. Jonathan, reporter. You're the main editor, is that right, for the Young Turks?
My title is managing editor, for what that's worth, yeah.
Managing editor, right. Well, thanks for being with us today. It was really informative talking with you.
Thanks so much. I always enjoy it.
And if you enjoyed today's meal, then definitely go for the dessert or even another helping. Go for Jonathan's reporting on everything you want to know about the National Prayer Breakfast, but we're afraid to ask. Go to tyt.com/inside the family for more of his fantastic reporting. And be sure to check out FFRF's TV program, Free Thought Matters. This week we are re-airing the program because it was so good. Our interview with Ron Reagan, son of President Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, who tells us why he is an unabashed atheist.
I don't feel terribly brave talking about this kind of thing. It's just, hey, it's not even a belief, as you know. It's a lack of belief. All I'm saying is a lot of people believe this certain thing. I see no evidence for it, and I don't believe things without evidence or reason. I don't believe in tooth fairies. I don't believe in the Easter Bunny. I don't believe in Santa Claus, and I don't believe in anybody's God. And I like to remind people that everybody is an atheist. Let's say most people in the United States who are religionists are Christian. Okay, they don't believe in Allah. They don't believe in Baal. They don't believe in Thor. They don't believe in Odin or anything like that. So everybody's an atheist. Everybody dismisses all the thousands of gods that have come before their God, and they just pick this one God that they want to believe in. I just go one God farther, like most atheists.
That's Ron Reagan, unafraid of burning in hell. Also, be sure to check out our radio show, Free Thought Radio. This week, our guest is Larry Shapiro, one of the co-authors with Stephen Nadler of the new book, When Bad Thinking Happens to Good People. Thank you for watching FFRF's Ask an Atheist.
And if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.
Freedom from religion.